Hey, what's going on, guys? Um, welcome back to my channel. It's been a little while. So, as the new car inventories in the market start getting somewhat back to normal, I've had a lot of people ask me about leasing. I've had a lot of speculation about leasing on people, leasing is just a scam, it's bad, da 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 da. So, I wanted to make this video to discuss a few things about leasing and answer some of these questions. So I've had people ask me leasing versus buying for cash buyers, what makes more sense? Because I have people that pay cash for vehicles, and every 3 years like clockwork, when the bumper to bumper's up, they come trade their vehicle back in. So I want to put this in a cash perspective on both, okay? So let's just say that buyer A comes in and they want to pay cash for a $30,000 SUV, and so does buyer B. Buyer A is open up to the option of leasing because they do trade every 3 years, but they've always felt like they want to own the vehicle. So when you lease a vehicle, you are financing a portion of the vehicle. So there is what's called a residual value when you're leasing, and that is what the experts think the vehicle is going to be worth in 3 years. So let's just say for ease sake that it's a 50% residual value. So you would be paying 50% of the vehicle. You have 50% of the vehicle left after the lease is up, and you're paying cash. So you pay tax on the $30,000, and then you're paying the 50%, because after the lease is up, the 50% that's left does not get taxed again, unless they change things. Okay, but let's just say, so $30,000 vehicle, you pay tax on the $30,000. Let's just say you're in an area where it's 7%. So taxes would be about $2,100. So you're at $32,100 for this vehicle, plus whatever fees a dealer may have. At my dealership, it would be $250 doc fee, 15 for temp tag, 20 for temp tag, 15 for your title registration. So $285 in total fees. So you're at $32,385. Okay, yeah, $32,385. Anyways, so you take that 50%, so you're at 15 plus the 2,285, whatever it was. So you're at roughly 17.3 is what you would pay cash on a lease for that vehicle. So you're paying that day 17.3. The rest of the money you can either at the end of your lease pay that difference and keep your car. You can trade your car in. You can turn it in and walk away from it. Buyer B goes into the dealership, looks at the exact same car, so $30,000 car, and they're not open to leasing. They know they're going to trade in 3 years, but they're not open to leasing. They pay cash for the car, so they paid essentially the same amount. So you're paying the $30,000 plus taxes. Okay, just for ease sake, let's just say there's no rebates or incentives, and the dealer didn't give them a better price. Whatever. Okay, this is just to make it easy. So buyer A just wrote a check for $17.3 to take the car home for 3 years. Buyer B just wrote a check for 32 something, almost 33, and they're going to take the car home for 3 years. Give me 1 second, honey, okay? Give me just a minute. Please? I'm making a video.
But I want to play the Mario Kart game.
Okay, let me make this and I'll go put on the Mario Kart. Okay?
Okay.
I'll be right there.
Okay.
And then in 3 years, they both go back to the dealership. Buyer A, since he leased the first time, this time he may have some lease pull ahead incentives. He may have down payment assistance, whatever the manufacturer throws at him. And they go look at, let's just say, the exact same price car because he wants to get another new one with bumper to bumper warranty. So does buyer B. So buyer A goes to the dealership. Let's just say that they have a little bit of trade equity. Maybe they had a residual value of 15 grand and their trade was worth 18. So they've got $3,000 in equity. Plus they got $2,000 in incentives from the manufacturer. So they've got $5,000 equity now. They can look at that same vehicle, and let's just say it's $30,000. It has a 50% residual value still. So it'd be think of it the same way. It'd be your $30,000 plus tax minus the residual, so they're 17 again. But they had $3,000 in equity. That takes it down to 14. And then there's $2,000 in down payment assistance from the manufacturer. That takes it down to 12. So then the second time, he writes a check for, let's just say 12 grand, okay? Buyer B comes in and the vehicle's paid off, so he has all equity, which is great. But he already wrote a check for $32,000. He comes in, trades that vehicle. Let's just say it's the same thing as buyer A. It's $18,000, okay? So, but then he buys again. So he bought the car for 100%. He traded in for 18. So on the purchase, you save tax money. So he would save some of the taxes. But let's just say it's $30,000. It's 18. So it leaves him with 12 plus tax. So he's writing a check for, let's just say, 13 to be conservative. Okay. So buyer A wrote a check 3 years ago for $32,000 and some change. Comes in and trades the vehicle, and he writes a check for 12 and some change. He has, even with the trade value, over the two purchases, he has spent $32,000 plus $12,000. So he spent $44,000 in 6 years out of his bank account. Buyer A has done the exact same thing, but he spent $17,000 the first time, and then where were we at? 10 and some change the second time. So buyer A leased, did the exact same thing as buyer B, but he spent $17,000 and $10,000 roughly. So he spent roughly $28,000 to have a new vehicle for 6 years that both depreciated at the same time. Both were worth less money than the day that it was bought. But since buyer A took advantage of a program that does not hold you financially responsible for a vehicle that depreciates because you have options, they spent less money. Buyer A spent $28,000. Buyer B spent $44,000 over the course of 6 years to buy two vehicles. So that is why I think leasing is a good option, given, okay, because it's not for everybody, given you trade every 3 years, you have excellent credit, because you do need excellent credit to qualify for a lease. Even on a one-pay, you still need to qualify to get the lease. It's just on a one-pay lease, you're paying your full lease up front, okay?
Dad, I can miss my tomato in the fridge.
Okay. Thank you, honey. I'll be right there to put on Mario Kart. Are you getting a snack?
And here I am, and then I'm playing Mario game.
Okay. Get your snack. I'll be right there to turn on Mario Kart, okay? So when you think of it in terms of that, because a lot of people think, well, okay, well, I'm financing, so you still have an interest rate. Well, you can break it down. So I don't want to say my math is to the penny, but again, I don't think it's going to be drastically different. Okay, I'm not at the dealership today. I could have something worked up, but again, if you think about how the two different types of buyers can still pay cash for the same thing, even if we take buyer A that saved a bunch of money, let's just add $2,000 a purchase, okay, because of interest, roughly. You're still going to come in a heck of a lot less than buyer B, who paid cash for both vehicles and did a purchase, okay? Even if we give buyer B purchase incentive, let's just say they got $3,000 each time, now you're down to 38. Buyer A that was at 27. Even if we add $4,000 for estimated interest over the couple years, he's still at 31. So he still saved $7,000 roughly to do the same thing buyer B accomplished by paying cash on a purchase. And so a lot of people ask too, is if leasing in terms of monthly payment is a lot cheaper. It can be. If you qualify for excellent interest rates on leasing with GM Financial, typically I want to say it's 750 to the 800s, 750 plus is when you can get the best rates possible, which on leasing is what you want to go for, because even though you're taking roughly half the cost of the vehicle that you're paying for and financing it over the 3 years, it's still a shorter time. So a lot of people are like, it's going to be drastically cheaper. It's not technically, because you're taking 50% and you got a 36 to 39 month loan if you're doing the payments, compared to what most people do is 75 to 84 months. So you're taking half the cost over half the time. So it typically is a little bit cheaper, maybe 50 to 100 bucks a month if you're doing payments on it. But again, this is where I recommend for people that are constantly trading every 3 years. Because the other thing is, if you do a purchase, compared to a lease. If you buy your car and you're financing your car and you're trading every 3 years, you have to do it smart though, because if you're buying your car, you're putting no money out of pocket, you're not paying your taxes up front, and you're financing whatever whatever deal the dealership can give you, financing over the course of the time. People want the cheapest payment, so people typically do 84-month term on a brand new vehicle. 75 or 84 is what I see all the time. When you put no money down, you're financing your taxes in the purchase. You're paying interest on your taxes, okay? So if you're putting no money down and you're financing a car for 84 months, so 7 years, and you pay on it for 3 years and then go try to trade it in, you have very little, if any, equity, because you didn't, you got to cover your taxes. You got to cover your $2,000 in taxes yet. You got your vehicle depreciating. You're putting miles on it. It depreciates with the new model year. So then everyone's like, well, I want to do a buy, so I own my car, but I go trade in 3 years. So that's when you're, okay, you bought the car, you paid that slightly higher payment, and then in 3 years you want to trade in, and then you have, let's just say that you're in a negative equity situation by a little bit. Let's just say you got $2,000 negative equity from your taxes that you financed originally because you didn't want to put money down and you went the longest term. Could be more than that, could be $3,000 negative equity, but I'll say 2 just to be conservative again, okay? So you bought your vehicle, you financed it because you wanted to own it, knowing you're going to trade in 3 years, and then you have $3,000 negative equity because you didn't buy smart, you didn't put money down, you didn't go for the shorter term and the higher payment, you went for the lowest payment you possibly could. So now, in 3 years, you go to buy another vehicle. You've got $2,000 that you're going to carry over, and again, you're putting no money down. And for sake of it being easy, I'm going to say that there's no rebates or whatever. But let's just say you're doing it again, no money down, not paying for your taxes, adding on $2,000 that you had negative equity. So now you do that again, and then in 3 years you go to trade in your vehicle again, and now your $2,000 negative equity turned into $4,000 negative equity because you didn't put money down again, and then you do it again, and then it turns into 6, and then 8, and that's where people start being like, well, I'm getting bad deals. The dealership's not taking care of me. They're giving me a bad deal. They're screwing me on my trade or whatever. No, you're just not. You're financing stuff that doesn't make sense. If you're not putting money down and you're financing your taxes and then paying interest on your taxes, your taxes don't affect the value of the vehicle. They're taxes that get sent to the government for them to do whatever the heck they want with it. That's just the way that it works. But again, that's where I say, if you're in that constant habit of financing or buying a vehicle every 3 years and you want to be out as little money as possible, leasing then makes sense for you. If you're good credit and you can put a little bit of money down, I mean, you can do 0 down on a lease. If you do put money down on a lease, typically your fronts, what the banks call your fronts, or your first payment due and things like that, typically, depending on the vehicle, an SUV around $30,000, maybe your fronts are $500 or $600. But that's what's nice about leasing, is that the options you have at the end of it. So I'll explain those a little bit more. So at the end of your lease, when the company that manufacturers work with that estimates what the vehicle is going to be worth in the next 3 years, and they say it's 50% residual. So you are not bound to that. You are bound to what you paid on day one. The residual value you're not tied to, okay? So what that means is, in 3 years, okay, my residual value is $15,000 yet. You can look at the market. Let's just say I work at a Chevy store, so let's just say I this year I lease a 2024 Chevy Equinox for $30,000. It's a front-wheel drive LT, whatever. I lease it. It's $30,000. I get the 50% residual. So in 3 years, I'm left with $15,000. Are you done? Okay, I'll be right there. And then I know this is a long video. I appreciate you guys for watching. So I'm left with $15,000. So then I can look in the market and I can say, okay, I have a 2024 Chevy Equinox. It's a front-wheel drive LT with these options on it. Okay, and I can buy mine for $15,000. And I really like my car. Maybe at that point I decide I don't want to lease again. So what I can do is I can look at other 2024 Chevy Equinoxes in the market that have the same equipment as mine, so I'm comparing apples to apples, and I can say, okay, I can buy mine for 15. These other ones in the market, they're selling for 10. Why would I buy mine for 15 when I could go buy a similar Equinox with similar miles and the same equipment for 10 grand? That'd be silly. Or the other side of it, I can buy mine for 15, but the Equinox has held their value pretty well. Maybe they're on the market for 20 grand still. Then I'm like, I can get a killer deal by buying mine, and it's got lower miles than some of these. So maybe that makes sense. And that's in the event that you decide to not release, okay? In that event, you can use leasing as a way to test what the market's going to look like in 3 years. You can, let's just say something happens and you no longer, let's just say that the Equinox for me was my grocery getter or my commuter, and I had a second vehicle in the household or whatever. Let's just say my situation changed and I no longer need to have 2 vehicles in the household, right? So at the end of the lease, I can take my keys back into the dealership. I can ground the vehicle, which basically means you're grounding it there for GM to come pick it up. You fill out an odometer statement, sign the application for dealer assignment, whatever, but it basically says, here's the miles of the vehicle. I'm turning it in. I have 2 keys. And when you are turning your vehicle back into GM will have someone come inspect the vehicle before they pick it up. And they're going to look for trying to make sure that the vehicle is in the condition it was the day you bought it. Because this is why some people don't like leasing, because GM owns the vehicle, but even when you buy your vehicle, the bank owns the vehicle. So that really doesn't make any sense either. So when GM comes to inspect the vehicle, they're going to make sure that it's like it was when it left the factory. So they're going to check for dents, stings, scratches, if it's been smoked in, if the seats are torn, excessive wear and tear is what they call it. Even down to if you bought the vehicle and it had all-weather liners in it and you turn it back in and you keep the all-weather liners, they're going to make you pay for those, okay? If GM finds absolutely nothing wrong with your vehicle, it's in perfect condition, the only thing that you're going to have, I believe it's a $395 disposition fee because you did not buy or lease another GM vehicle, okay? But again, most people at that point are like, okay, well, I've had this vehicle, I don't need it anymore, I'll pay the $395 or whatever, or you take it up with GM, out of my hands, and they move on with life, right? Or, in the example I said earlier, where you owe 15 on your vehicle, they're retailing for 20 plus, and you decide, okay, well, I like this vehicle, but I want something different, and you can decide, you go get your vehicle appraised and you owe 15 on it and the dealership offers you 18 grand. So you've got $3,000 in equity, and maybe you decide to lease again, apply that as a down payment on the lease to reduce your monthly payment. I've even had people that have been in equity on leases and they lease another vehicle. But instead of putting that equity as down payment, because at the end of your 3 years that money is gone, they're like, you know what, you guys give me 18 grand for the trade. My residual value is 15, so I only need 15 grand to pay that vehicle off at that point, right? So the dealership gave me 18, they applied 15 to pay the vehicle off, and they can, keep it, sell it, whatever they want to do with it. But I'm okay with the lease payments where they are. So I've had cases where someone's come in to lease a vehicle in a similar instance, and you know what? I'm fine at the payoff amount on the lease. Write me a check for the $3,000 equity, and I'll lease this vehicle, and we'll move on with life. That's a possibility too. Trying to think of what else there is to cover on that subject. I mean, leasing makes sense if you take care of your cars, you don't put excessive miles on them, and you trade every 3 years. Oh, the next one being, what happens if I go over my mileage? I get this a lot. So when you lease, you do either 10,000, 12,000, or 15,000 mile per year leases. So on a 15,000 mile lease for 39 months, it's roughly, I think it's 47.5 that you get on the mileage. So for every mile you go over is 25 cents a mile that you would get in fees. You only pay this if the car is going back to the manufacturer. So if you buy your car you do not pay that overage. If the dealership is taking your car in for inventory purposes only and not turning it into GM, you do not get hit with that penalty. Okay. So again, some of that just goes into, is the dealer going to be truthful with you on you're working a deal and you're like, okay, I really don't want to get hit with a $2,000 overage or whatever it may be for miles. Hey, Mr. Dealership, are you keeping my vehicle to sell it, or are you turning it into GM? And then you're going to have to be reliant on if they're going to be honest about you, or honest to you on what their plans are to do with your vehicle when you leave there that day. Okay?
Dad, you make a good.
Okay.
Okay.
But guys, I think that's most everything that I have to cover today. Thank you so much for watching. I just wanted to clarify some things on leasing vehicles. I hope you're having an awesome day. If you have any questions that I missed, let me know in the comment section. But I just wanted to give an update because it's been a little while. It's been crazy busy, and I've been trying to spend more time with the family. So my daughter's been bugging me to play Mario Kart, so I think that's what we're going to do. But guys, have an awesome day. We'll talk to you soon.